The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening is a Nintendo Game Boy game released in 1993 across the globe. 5 years later, in 1998, a color version called Link's Awakening DX was also released. Its producer was Zelda creator Shigeru Miyamoto, and was directed by Takashi Tezuka, who had previously directed the NES Mario series, as well as both the NES Zelda and Link to the Past. The writers for the story were Yoshiaki Koizumi, who previously had done the manual for A Link to the Past, and Kensuke Tanabe, who wrote the scenarios for A Link to the Past and designed courses for Doki Doki Panic and Super Mario Bros. 3. The composers consisted of Kazumi Totaka, famous for Totaka's Song, Minako Hamano, composer for the Metroid series, and Kazui Ishikawa, composer for Star Fox 2, Earthbound, and Wario Land 2 and 3. The initial version sold 3.83 million copies, and the DX version sold 2.22 million copies by 2004, so over 6 million total, outselling A Link to the Past. Takamitsu Kuzuhara and Kazuaki Morita were both programmers for the game, Morita having worked on Mario Bros. And being credited as the creator for the Hammer Brothers. His first programming work was that of Ice Climber. Link's Awakening began life as an unofficial side project of Kazuaki Morita's. Using one of the first ever Game Boy development kits, he created a Zelda-like game on his own, largely using it only to test the system's capabilities. Other members of Nintendo's entertainment, analysis, and development team began to work on it as well, in an unofficial capacity. Takashi Tezuka separately had asked for permission to port A Link to the Past to the Game Boy, which led to a reassembling of the team that worked on A Link to the Past. This culminated in the work merging with that of the ongoing unofficial work by Morita and Co., as their work looked very promising, and thus began Link's Awakening's 1.5-year development. Link's Awakening had a sort of unrestrained development, having a number of unauthorized cameos by non-Zelda franchises, such as Kirby and Mario, and Tezuka instructed writer Tanabe, scriptwriter for A Link to the Past, who came early on to Link's Awakening's team, to omit series aspects such as Princess Zelda herself, the Triforce, and so on. Tanabe had wanted to use the concept of a great egg on top of the mountain, cracking open and resulting in the world's end, in A Link to the Past, and that became central to the plot of Link's Awakening. Koizumi, also a writer for A Link to the Past, was brought on a little later than Tanabe, and came up with the idea of the dream setting, as well as how the interactions with the villagers would play out. Tezuka early on instructed the team that he wanted the game to have a Twin Peaks feel, with Eiji Aonuma later commenting that Link's Awakening was the first to have an actual plot, and was later quoted as saying Link's Awakening was the quintessential isometric Zelda game. One could attribute this to the bizarre world created in Majora's Mask later on by Eiji Aonuma, which had a similar development timetable under 2 years. Tanabe wrote all lines in the game, with the exception of the owl and windfish. Shigeru Miyamoto notably provided no creative input to the team as producer. Rather, later on in the game's development, he acted as the game tester, and many of his opinions shaped the game in its second half of development. The soundtrack of the game was composed by both Minako Hamano and Kazui Ishikawa, it being their first project they worked on. Totaka did all the sound programming and the sound effects. Aonuma noted that, had Link's Awakening not been developed before Ocarina of Time, Ocarina of Time would have turned out to be a much different game, and its influence on this and later games is notable. The game contains a number of tropes which first appeared in the Game Boy title. The ocarina appears in the game, whereas in A Link to the Past it was referred to as the magic flute. While in that game it was mostly used as a warp, in this game you learn 3 songs, one of which is a warp. The other 2 are needed for progression. This arguably foreshadows the heavier emphasis some later games would place on music, as a good chunk of the story focuses around Marin, her singing, and the quest items you seek in order to wake the Wimpfish, which are in fact musical instruments. Another bit that first appears here and is later more fleshed out in Ocarina of Time is the fishing. This game also marks the first time where Link could steal from a shopkeeper. This popped up twice again in Twilight Princess, though the first time was required for progression. The second time was optional, and it would lead to you being pestered by a bird until you paid. The thievery in Link's Awakening was much more harrowing to me, however. If you grab an item and walk around the store owner several times, you can eventually get him to turn his back to you. A text box will ask you if you're pleased with yourself. You're now cursed and will be referred to as Thief in all caps by every NPC in the game in lieu of your own name. And if you return to the shop, the owner will promptly zap you to death. Personally, this terrified me as a kid. I figured out how to do it on my own, and upon doing so, when he killed me, I was really scared and went and asked my mom to teach me how to pray because I was pretty sure I was going to go to hell for that. This game also begins the series trope of having a long trading sequence. One of the items, in America at least, called a mermaid's necklace, was changed from the Japanese and European releases, where it was the mermaid's bra. The last item in this trading sequence is the magnifying glass, which allows one to read a book at the library which contains the path to solve the final dungeon. As a bonus, the magnifying glass also allows players to see a hidden cave which contains a Goriya item trader. You can trade one of several of your inventory items in order to get a boomerang. It's one of the most powerful items in the game, however, the Goriya does regret trading it to you, so if you'd like your item back, you can trade it back. Unique to the DX version of the game is a photographer mouse who wants to take pictures of Link throughout his journey. Several are unique. For example, Marin follows you for a segment of the game. If you jump down into the well, it will cause her to land on top of Link, during which the photographer will snap a photo. Another one of these unique occurrences is in a top right building in the Animal Village. There is seemingly no occupant in the house. However, if you have the magnifying glass, you will see the Zora, to which the photographer will snap a photo. Of note is the importance of the Lens of Truth in the Ocarina of Time, arguably an analog of the magnifying glass, and then the pictograph box from Majora's Mask, as well as its later iteration in Wind Waker. Another side quest is that of collecting seashells. They are littered throughout the overworld. They're hidden in a similar vein to Korok seeds in Breath of the Wild. They're not required for completion, but gaining 20 allows you to collect the level 2 sword of the game. During the segment of the game which has you walking Bow Wow, he will react towards areas which have seashells hidden. Bow Wow is one of several characters which are nods to other Nintendo franchises, his being Mario. Goombas and Piranha Plants can be found in the 2D platforming segments of the game, and there's even a Kirby found as a dungeon enemy, flying and inhaling Link, though he does spit him back out. The Cuckoo Keeper resembles Luigi, Princess Peach is used in a photograph, Mamu is Wart from Super Mario Bros. 2, the spiny sea urchins resemble Gordos from Kirby, and Mr. Right is Dr. Right from SimCity, with his house theme being a remix of his from SimCity. Finally, and arguably most importantly, Prince Richard is the rival of the main character in a video game called Karu no Tamani Kane ha Naru, and Richard's villa theme is a remix of the Karu overworld theme. If you wait long enough listening to his song, Totaka's song will eventually play. Totaka's song appears in many games, however, Karu no Tamani Kane ha Naru is the third song in which Totaka's song appeared. The game itself takes place on the island of Koholint. Link wakes up on a bed with a girl standing over him, who corrects him when he calls her Zelda. Her name is Marin. Her father, Terran, calls you by name and explains he read it on the back of a shield. Your shield, and your first item of the game. This introduces a mechanic somewhat unique to the first Overhead games of the series. Whereas in the previous two Zeldas, Link would always hold his shield in front of him, you manually did so in this game, which permitted some changes in gameplay. Marin then explains to you how to get to the beach where she found you and that the area is full of monsters. Aside from using the shield to block said monsters, it's also used to pass a puzzle of sorts. There are these spiny enemies on the beach which Link has to push out of the way in order to retrieve his sword, as walking into them damages you and knocks you back. There you're introduced to the owl of the game. In lieu of a Link to the Past map markers, the owl largely gives you somewhat on-the-nose advice as to how you might solve your quest in the game. Generally, he'll appear in new areas, giving you the lowdown. He also tells you of the windfish you must awaken to leave the island, which resides in the giant egg on top of the mountain. This iteration of Zelda follows much of the formula of the previous ones. There are phones around the map which you can use to call Old Man Orira. He's too shy to talk in person, so he only ever speaks over the phone. He works much like the fortune teller did in Link to the Past. A novel mechanic of the game is that being on the Game Boy, players are limited to the D-pad, start and select, and A and B buttons. Looping back to the shield, your inventory is mapped to A and B. This includes your sword and shield, which previously the sword was mapped to its own button, and as stated, the shield was held in front of Link automatically. Now you must pick and choose what you equip at any given moment. Equipping the Rock Feather allows you to jump, a first in Overhead Zeldas, and using it alongside the sword can give Link an extra level of mobility when fighting. In some ways, one might find this inventory management to be a hindrance, but you can equip bombs and the bow in both the A and B slots, allowing you for the first time in the series to shoot bomb arrows. These aren't necessary for beating the game, and it also isn't something the game teaches you to do. In fact, whether or not they're intended to work like that in the game has never been confirmed nor denied by the creators. Pressing select will bring up the map. A significant difference between A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening is that here, the map is only revealed bit by bit as Link explores every cell of the overworld. There weren't too many additions between the original and the DX version. The stone fragment item in dungeons was changed to a stone beak, and the statues themselves were changed to owls. Since the statues give hints based on the dungeon, it was a pretty seamless change. Another is the photographer mouse. Finally, the largest addition is that of the color dungeon, which utilizes the color aspect in its puzzles. Completing this dungeon awards the player with their choice of either a blue tunic or red tunic, which increases defense or attack respectively. You can re-enter the dungeon and complete it again to switch between red or blue, but you cannot go back to the green tunic.